If you're shopping for a compact crossover in America and you want more off-road ability than normal, you want a V6 engine under the hood, and you want some luxury touches on the inside that we don't find in all that many compact crossovers, then the 2020 Jeep Cherokee is the crossover for you. The Cherokee was recently refreshed. We got a restyled and less controversial front end. We got a new engine under the hood with slightly improved fuel economy, and not too much happened on the inside. Not too much happened with the structure of the Cherokee either. And that is one of the important things to keep in mind, because although the Cherokee is certainly the most off-road capable entry in its segment, it also is one of the more compromised as a result. For 2020, there seems to be a Cherokee for everybody out there. This comes in no less than 10 different trim levels. There are 3 different engines under the hood, including one of the few remaining V6 engines. There are 3 different axle ratios, 3 different four-wheel drive or all-wheel drive systems, depending on what you want to call exactly what's going on under there, and the only low-ratio gearbox in this segment. This has a true 2-speed transfer case and an available locking rear differential. Now, the model that we're looking at is not the rugged off-road version of the Cherokee, even though arguably this is more off-road capable than the vast majority of entries in this segment. This is, in theory, one of the more luxurious options in the Cherokee lineup. So if you're looking for 4-way adjustable lumbar support, some nicer touches on the inside, and you want a Jeep logo on the front, that's what this trim's for. Regardless of which trim you get, however, we do get full LED headlamps up front, a nice touch for 2020. We also have fog lamps down there in most trims. The big change for this refresh isn't the LED headlamps, it's where the headlamps are located in the front end. Because when the Cherokee first launched in this generation, it had, shall we say, a controversial front end. Some people just thought it was really ugly. They put the headlamp sort of here in the front end rather than up top where they normally are in most vehicles. Now, interestingly enough, this is a style choice that we have seen Hyundai replicate. I happen to have a Hyundai Venue in my driveway at the same time, and you can see that this has that more controversial headlamp layout that they appear to have copied from Jeep, where the headlamps are down here, turn signals are right up there. When it comes to active safety, Jeep is still going about things pretty differently than Honda or Toyota, so we don't find their active safety technologies standard in any trim level of Cherokee for some reason. However, the complete suite of active safety systems that we see on this model, including autonomous braking, adaptive cruise control, lane keeping assistance, etc., is available on every trim. You just have to check the option box. I have to admit, I'm a little bit disappointed in that. I would have hoped that, especially in the upper level trims, that technology would become standard. And it is worth noting that the RAV4 includes a lot of those safety technologies standard on even the base trim. At just over 183 inches long, the Cherokee slots right between the Compass and the larger Grand Cherokee in the lineup. The Jeep lineup is important to understand, especially when you start taking a look at the sales charts. This is the 6th best seller in the compact crossover segment. But remember that Jeep has a ton of 2-row crossovers. They have the Renegade, the Compass, the Cherokee, and of course the Grand Cherokee. And that's before we even start talking about the other Jeep 2-row off-road vehicle, of course, the Jeep Wrangler. All Jeep models are clearly focused on off-road ability, and that's why we see 2 different front ends in the Cherokee. This one is the more luxurious front end. It's also the more aerodynamic one. If you were to get the Trailhawk model, then it has a serious focus on approach angles, and I think it does look a little peculiar from some angles. It has a really abrupt approach angle right there on the front. Ground clearance varies by the trim. If you get the Trailhawk model, then we get 8.7 inches of ground clearance, which is among the best in this segment. If you want higher ground clearance than that in the Jeep lineup, you'll have to look at something like a Wrangler or a Grand Cherokee. But if you get the front-wheel drive versions of the Cherokee, then we get pretty low ground clearance overall for this segment. It definitely comes in below a lot of the competition, even in their front-wheel drive formats. Since we're taking a look at one of the more luxurious trims of Cherokee, we don't have the tow hooks that we find in the Trailhawk model, and we have less black cladding going on. We also have twin exhaust tips down there at the bottom. Adding to the more premium feel, we have full LED tail lamps and turn signals in the rear, rather than combination elements like we find in most of the competition. The turn signals are also amber, which is my preference. Engine-wise, things start out with a 2.4-liter 4-cylinder engine that produces 180 horsepower and 171 pound-feet of torque. That is a little bit less oomph than we find in many of the Cherokee's direct competitors. And it's worth noting that the Cherokee is on the heavy side for this segment, as we'll talk about in a little bit, and that's why that engine will give you 24 to 25 miles per gallon below many of its direct competitors, even though it produces a little bit less power. That's likely the reason that most of the Cherokees on the dealer lot in the area where I live have this 3.2-liter V6 under the hood or the optional 2-liter turbo. This V6 produces 271 horsepower and 239 pound-feet of torque, notably more power and more torque than most of the competition, and the optional 2-liter turbo is one of the most powerful in this segment, producing 270 horsepower and 295 pound-feet of torque. Depending on which all-wheel drive system you get, this engine will give you 21 to 23 miles per gallon, and the 2-liter turbo will bump that up to a maximum of 26 miles per gallon combined. All three engines are mated to a 9-speed automatic transmission. That transmission was a little bit controversial when the Cherokee first launched, but it has been refined over the years, and now finally I can say I don't mind the way this 9-speed automatic shifts. We'll talk about that in the drive section, of course. But first we should talk about all-wheel drive systems, or as Jeep likes to call them, four-wheel drive systems. The difference truly is all in marketing. For instance, within the FCA umbrella, they will sell a Grand Cherokee and label it as a four-wheel drive vehicle, and then they'll sell a Dodge Durango with the exact same system and call it all-wheel drive. So truly, you need to know how the system functions rather than what the manufacturer has decided to call it. And regardless of what you want to call the system in the Cherokee, this is one of the most capable in the segment and one of the more capable all-wheel drive systems truly in general. That's because not only do we have the ability to lock the center coupling in most versions, we also have the availability of a true locking rear differential and again, the only 2-speed transfer case available in a compact crossover right now. Excluding approach, departure, breakover angles, traction, etc., just talking about the nature of the all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive system, this system is just about as capable as the one that we find in the Jeep Grand Cherokee and, to be perfectly honest, arguably as capable as one of the systems in the Jeep Wrangler at least. That's because even though we have an open front differential, this vehicle has the ability to truly lock the connection between the front differential and the rear differential together, so that way you're sending 50% of engine power to the front, 50% of engine power to the rear regardless of wheel slip, and then it can fully lock the rear differential, sending 25% of engine power to one wheel, 25% to the other. And if the front axle had absolutely zero traction, it could send all of the available power to the rear wheels because of that truly locked center coupling, and theoretically even to a single rear wheel because of that true locking rear differential. The overall design of this system is more robust and less prone to overheating than the all-wheel drive systems with torque vectoring and limited slip functionality that we see available in Toyota and Honda product lines. There's also a true 2-speed transfer case available in the Cherokee. It's not on the model that we have right here, but that is going to give you a low first gear ratio that is about 3 times lower than the next closest competitor. Interesting point of trivia, the Cherokee, when you get that option, doesn't just have one 2-speed transfer case, it actually has two, one in the front and one in the rear, and the drive shaft between them is spinning at a different rate. Depending on the options you select, the Cherokee can tow between 2,000 and 4,500 pounds. At this point, some of you might be thinking, I wouldn't really want to tow 4,500 pounds with a small, lightweight crossover. Well, that's where we need to talk about curb weight, because the Cherokee can weigh between 3,600 and nearly 4,300 pounds. That means that the top-end Trailhawk model, which is the heaviest version of the Cherokee, can weigh nearly as much as an all-wheel drive Toyota Highlander, which is a much bigger 3-row vehicle. Why is the Cherokee so heavy? Well, obviously some of that has to do with the 3.2-liter V6 engine under the hood in a sea of small 4-cylinder engines, but a lot of it also has to do with the Cherokee's off-road mission and those compromises I mentioned earlier. The entire Cherokee platform had to be designed to accommodate the very off-road capable Trailhawk model with the skid plates, the tow hooks, the 2-speed transfer case, etc., and that meant an awful lot more structure than we find in some of the competition and therefore more weight. In addition to having a very rigid structure so that way you can have 1, 2, or sometimes even 3 wheels off the ground depending on what you're doing, we also have reinforced suspension attachment points to the unibody, etc., things that we don't find in the competition, but all of that comes at the expense of weight and fuel economy. That is also going to hamper handling, braking, and acceleration. Front seat comfort is excellent in the Cherokee. The driver's seat has a 4-way adjustable lumbar support and a 2-position seat memory, and the passenger seat has the exact same range of motion as the driver's seat, including that 4-way lumbar, something that we don't really see in the competition. The driver gets a tilt telescopic steering column with a moderate range of motion. You will find a little bit more motion as far as the in-out motion in something like a RAV4 or CRV. Before I hop in the rear, I should mention that the front seats don't move terribly far down compared to the competition. So if you really want a lower, sunk-in driving position, you're not going to find that in the Cherokee. It's pretty upright all the way around. Although that does help contribute to the good visibility that we find in the Cherokee compared to some of the options out there. Hopping into the back, we find one of the better combined legroom figures in this segment. You will find a little bit more legroom in some of the options out there, but this is pretty similar overall to the Honda CR-V. We also have a relatively generous amount of headroom. My head is just barely touching the ceiling, but we are in the model with the optional panoramic moonroof, and that does cut down on rear seat headroom. If I scoot all the way over to the right side of the vehicle, this front seat's all the way back in its tracks. You can see that my knees are just barely touching the seat. It is worth noting that the front seats do move a little bit further rearward than some of the competition, so if you're a taller front passenger or a taller driver, the Cherokee might be a good option. Something that we don't normally see in smaller two-row crossovers is a sliding second row seat. That can be a handy feature if you want to carry larger cargo in the back and you have a child in the rear that doesn't need the legroom, or if you have a child seat in the middle here and you want that child to be a little bit closer to the action up front. Cargo capacity is one of the other compromises that we see in the Cherokee. Even though this is about the same size overall as the RAV4 and CR-V, we find notably less cargo room back here. And a lot of that has to do with the height of the load floor. You'll notice it's pretty high. That's again because the Cherokee was designed to accommodate that off-road capable Trailhawk model where departure angles were very important, and it does receive a different rear bumper, and they needed to make everything a little bit higher off the ground like we see in the Grand Cherokee in order to accommodate that. They also needed the cargo area to be able to accommodate a full-size spare tire. The model that we're driving does not have one, but you can see it would definitely fit under there, and you do find a full-size spare available. In the model that we're driving, because we have the more compact spare, you do have a little bit of extra cargo room available. A question I get asked frequently is why do Jeep, Chrysler, and Dodge tend to put their power liftgate button right over here on the side of the vehicle rather than on the liftgate itself? The reason is overall height. If you're a shorter person or a child, it's going to be a lot easier to hit that button right there than reaching all the way up to the top. Again, on the inside, keep in mind that this is a refresh, not a redesign for 2019 and 2020. So we still have this large panoramic moonroof, and much of what we see in the interior is still the same. The moonroof shade is completely opaque, and it does stop in two different positions. You can go all the way to the rear. The driver and front passenger get height adjustable shoulder belts and these very large two-way adjustable headrests. We have Jeep embossed on the seats. Remember, we are driving the upper end trim. This particular model has leather upholstery, and these seats are perforated because they're both heated and ventilated. You can see that we have moderate bolstering on the seat back and seat bottom cushions. Nothing too aggressive going on here. The interior design is definitely very monochromatic, but there's a lot of soft touch material going on here. We have a soft touch upper section of the door, the armrest, and that insert right behind the armrest, and then we have harder plastics down at the bottom of the door, for instance around that bottle holder and the speaker grill. Those harder plastics are there for overall durability. The dashboard style has a hint of Grand Cherokee going on. We have a soft touch upper section of the dashboard. Right here in the center of the dash, there is a little storage cubby. Keep in mind that things do get pretty hot up there in the sun. Right over here, we have the slightly larger than 8-inch touchscreen infotainment system. As you can see, we have Apple CarPlay and Android Auto support in there. This is not the absolute latest version of Uconnect 5. However, this is the one immediately before that. We have the autonomous parking button right there, a feature that we don't find in all the competition. Front and rear parking sensors, enable disable button, lane keeping assist button right there. Down below, we have 2-zone automatic climate control. In case you're wondering, there is a button to disable that auto start-stop system. That's something that bugs a lot of people out there. Below that, we have enough room to store some of those larger smartphones. There are two different USB ports. Both of them work with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, which is a nice touch. This one right here is a little bit easier to access, but there's one in the center console. This is the shift knob for the terrain management system on the all-wheel drive. So we have several different drive modes there: auto, snow, sport, mud. If you got the more off-road capable version, then there would be a few different button options there. We have a pretty traditional console shifter right here, electric parking brake right there, two big cup holders, and then here is the center console. It is softly padded, and if I pop it open inside, you can see that other USB input and a charge-only port. The instrument cluster features a physical tachometer and speedometer, and then a large central color LCD. This is running basically the same software that we see in a bunch of other FC vehicles. So we have a number of different additional readouts here: individual tire pressure, coolant temperature, transmission temperature, oil temperature, etc. A few more readouts than we find in the average vehicle in this segment. You'll also find a digital speedometer in here, your typical trip computer readouts, the readouts of the active safety systems, etc. The steering wheel is thick-rimmed and leather-wrapped in this particular trim. We have a split bottom spoke, and the buttons are very similar to what we see in other FCA vehicles. This button module controls that multifunction LCD instrument cluster. We have dedicated phone and voice command buttons. On this side, we have controls for regular cruise control and then adaptive cruise control down here. So if you want to use adaptive cruise control, you press this button. If you want to use regular cruise control, you press that button right there. You'll notice that we don't have any infotainment buttons on the front. That's because they are on the back. We have volume up, down over here. We have track forward and backward over here. You can also mode change with those buttons as well. Sorry everybody for this drive section being a little bit different. Unfortunately, we had a computer error and I lost the video that we recorded while we were actually driving the vehicle. In our 0 to 60 tests, we got 6.9 seconds for this 3.2 liter V6 model. In a limited time that we had to test a turbocharged model, we ended up at 6.5 in that model. So if you're looking for the fastest Cherokee and really one of the faster entries available in this segment period, that's going to be the model with the 2 liter turbo under the hood. All Cherokees have the 9-speed automatic transmission from ZF, and it appears that for 2020 there have been some changes made to the transmission. Now, I reached out to FCA and I asked them what has changed for 2020, and unfortunately after about 2 weeks or so they still have not gotten back to me on that. It is understood that there possibly have been some mechanical changes for 2020, certainly some software changes, but either way you slice it, this is the smoothest interpretation of ZF's 9-speed that I've ever driven. It is definitely smoother and quicker shifting than theoretically the same transmission that we see under the hood of the Honda Pilot, for instance. So if you don't like the way that transmission has shifted in the past, you may want to give the Cherokee another look, because it appears that they've solved all the complaints that I had about this particular 9-speed. The biggest difference is the time that it takes this transmission to downshift. So if you're out on the highway and you're going 65 or 70 miles an hour and you want to pass someone and you floor the vehicle, it downshifts significantly faster than before. And then when downshifting going down a hill, it also appears to be much quicker. So we don't really have that strange delay that we had prior to 2020. In our braking tests, this particular model stopped from 60 miles an hour back to 0 in 122 feet. That is a little bit longer than some of the other options out there, but remember that the Cherokee is pretty heavy. And that heavy curb weight does affect handling. I'm going to give this a B- when it comes to the handling score. You will definitely find a more engaging driving experience in something like a Mazda CX-5 or even Toyota's RAV4. Not only are they lighter, but they're also tuned more towards on-road driving. And that is the important compromise to keep in mind. The Cherokee, even in the on-road focused trims, and we were definitely driving one of those on-road focused Cherokee models, is still more off-road focused than really any of the competition, including something like the Subaru Forester. You won't find things like the skid plates, the 2-speed transfer case, the amount of wheel articulation, or the way that the all-wheel drive system is programmed in really any of the competition. Perhaps the closest thing that we will get to the off-road ability in the Cherokee may be the upcoming Ford Baby Bronco. We're told that that may pull some of the tricks that we see out of this Jeep Cherokee and put them into that Ford model, but we don't know exactly what we are and are not going to get. And we don't expect to get things like the 2-speed transfer case in that Ford. So the Jeep is probably really going to stand alone in terms of the off-road ability. Now, not too many people are taking their compact crossover rock crawling, but if you did want to, and then you also wanted to be able to drive that same vehicle on your daily commute with relatively good handling overall, that is what the Cherokee is all about. But that still makes the Cherokee quite different than something like the RAV4 TRD Off-Road. That model, even though it's theoretically the off-road version of the RAV4, is not as off-road capable as most versions of the Cherokee. It's not going to have the locking rear differential. It's not going to have the 2-speed transfer cases. It does not have skid plates for some reason. That I think is a surprising thing for a TRD off-road model. And it also won't have any recovery hook points, things that we do find on the Cherokee. So if you are taking your vehicle like this out off the beaten path, you do want those tow hooks, that way you can be able to get out of stickier situations. On the other hand, because of the off-road mission, the ride quality in the Cherokee is excellent. This easily gets an A. The Cherokee suspension soaks up large bumps and big bumps very, very well, and that's exactly what you'd expect out of an off-road focused model. If you're going to be spending hours out on a dirt road or a gravel road or a moderate trail, this is the kind of vehicle that you want to spend that time in, because it's going to be an awful lot more comfortable, a lot less punishing to your body than some of the more firmly sprung options out there. It's also going to be a little bit quieter than some of the other options out on the trail. We got 72 decibels in the cabin, so I'm going to give this an A when it comes to our cabin noise score. Depending on exactly the version that you're looking at, this may or may not be quieter than the RAV4. Road noise appears to be a little bit better controlled in the Cherokee, but wind noise is a little bit better controlled in the RAV4. You'll also notice the Cherokee's weight figures when it comes to fuel economy. The 2-liter turbo is probably going to give most folks out there better real-world fuel economy than the 3.2, but I have to say I was relatively impressed with the fuel economy in the Cherokee, all things considered. We averaged 22.5 miles per gallon over a week of mixed driving. That is just a hair better than the EPA score of 22, but I'm going to give this a B because there are significantly more fuel-efficient vehicles out there. Again, this is keeping in mind that the Cherokee is the more off-road focused entry in this segment, and as a result is fairly heavy. The way this transmission is designed, it has 4 overdrive gears, and the final overdrive gear, 9th gear, depending on the engine option you get in your Cherokee, may not engage until over 80 miles an hour. Now, that has a really positive effect on real-world fuel economy in states like Texas, or if you're driving across the Midwest and you're going 75 or 80 miles an hour, you are going to notice a fuel economy benefit from those higher gears. But if you live in the city and you're just spending most of your time in stop-and-go traffic, or you live in a state with relatively low speed limits, then you aren't going to notice as much of a benefit from that 9-speed. And of course, if you were really interested in fuel economy, you would probably be looking at one of the hybrid options in this segment, like the CR-V hybrid or the Toyota RAV4 hybrid. But again, all things considered, I think the fuel economy is better than I thought it would be in the Cherokee. 22.5 miles per gallon really isn't that bad for something that is this heavy and still has a reasonable amount of off-road ability. As always, that is something you have to think about when looking at the Cherokee versus the mainline competition, especially the top sellers in this segment. Are you looking for something that is more focused at on-road ability or more focused at off-road ability, and are you willing to have the compromises that result from that decision? Let me know down there in the comment section below, and now let's dive into the pricing. Now, on the surface of things, it looks like this is going to be a little bit more expensive than a base RAV4 because we don't have all the same kind of standard equipment on that model. The active safety package is optional. However, remember that we're going to get more cash on the hood of the Cherokee, so average transaction price for a comparably equipped Cherokee is probably going to be about the same as a RAV4. But the big thing you're going to notice about this chart on your screen is just how many different trims there are of the Jeep Cherokee. There are 10 different trims on the screen, and that's before we even talk about something like the Jeep Cherokee Overland, which is out there, but for some reason not on Jeep's website at the moment. We've reached out to FCA to see if the Cherokee Overland has been for some reason canceled for 2020, but you should know that there are a ton on dealer lots around the country. We checked inventory and it looks like there are at least 1,500 Overland models available around the country right now. So it definitely is there, adding an 11th to this list. That's the model you're going to want if you want features like Napa leather, a stitched leather dashboard, and real wood trim available in your compact crossover. But more central to Jeep's lineup are the off-road trims of Cherokee. You can now get a Cherokee Trailhawk with some of the more luxury touches on the inside. You'll find that in the Trailhawk Elite, or you could get the more regular trim of Trailhawk. Either way you go, however, this is going to be the only entry in this segment that has the complete package of things like tow hooks, 2-speed transfer case, skid plates, etc. All the things that you really will need if you plan on taking your crossover actually off-roading. Of course, the trouble here when it comes to comparisons is that very few people take their vehicle off-road, and even fewer people take their compact crossovers off-roading. And that's why the top competition to the Cherokee sells so well in America. And the first one is obviously going to be the Toyota RAV4, the best-selling compact crossover at the moment. Despite this generation's more rugged looks, the RAV4 is certainly still very on-road focused. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. The RAV4 is going to be a lot more fun to drive out on your favorite winding mountain road. It's also going to be more fuel efficient, and that's even before we start talking about things like the 40 mile per gallon available hybrid system. It also feels a little bit fresher. I have to say that I like the overall exterior design of the RAV4, and the interior also feels a little bit more fresh and a little bit more modern than what we see in the Jeep. But on the downside, we don't see the same level of luxury touches, if you want to go that direction with the Cherokee, or the same level of off-road capability as we see in the Jeep, as I said before, even when you take a look at something like the TRD off-road version of the RAV4. Now, arguably, that is because if you were looking for a two-row vehicle that had more off-roading potential in the Toyota lineup, they have the Toyota 4Runner. And in some ways, the 4Runner competes with the Wrangler and the Jeep Cherokee almost simultaneously in the Toyota lineup, not really the RAV4 when we're talking about those more off-road oriented models. And if we're talking about the top-end, more luxury-oriented versions of the Jeep Cherokee, there's now a Toyota Venza for that. That's going to be that more premium interior, more premium exterior styling in the Toyota lineup. Moving along, we see a very similar comparison in the Honda CR-V, to be frank, so this is going to be pretty short. Basically, this is going to be more on-road focused, more fun to drive. We get more power under the hood out of the hybrid system than we find out of the base engine option in the Jeep Cherokee. It's going to be a little bit faster, 0 to 60, but it's certainly not going to be as off-road focused. At the moment in the Honda lineup, there is no off-road focused version of the CR-V. They are definitely all very, very on-road focused, so we don't even see that corollary to something like the RAV4 TRD. And that brings us along to Ford. In the Ford lineup, we're going to have the Escape, and we're also going to have the Bronco Sport. Some folks are calling that the Baby Bronco. By all appearances, the Bronco Sport is probably going to be the most direct competitor to the Jeep Cherokee here, because within the Ford lineup, they decided to split their compact crossover, and the Escape is going to be the more on-road focused model, the more daily driver focused version, and then the Bronco Sport is going to be more off-road styled, a lot more aggressive on the outside, and hopefully more off-road capable as well, although there are a lot of details we clearly don't know yet. It's going to have basically the same 1.5 liter and 2 liter turbo engines that we see available in the Escape, but have a boxier profile. The overall wheelbase appears to be very similar to what we see in the rest of the compact segment, so it does not appear that it's going to be a Jeep Renegade competitor or really a Jeep Compass competitor either. It really appears to be more RAV4 and Ford Escape sized overall. But until we know more about that Bronco Sport, it's a little bit difficult to talk about it in this context. So instead, let's dive back into the Ford Escape. The Escape is available as a turbocharged vehicle. We have a 1.5 liter turbo, a 2 liter turbo, we have a hybrid system, and a plug-in hybrid system. So regardless of whatever kind of engine you seem to want under the hood, whether you want 3 cylinders or 4 cylinders or a plug, Ford has got an option for you. But I'm not entirely convinced about the overall exterior design on the Escape. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below. I don't think it's quite as attractive as the RAV4, or honestly, the refreshed version of the Jeep Cherokee. On the interior, it definitely feels a little bit more modern, but it also feels quite monochromatic. So I do like the fact that some of the other alternatives in this segment, especially something like that new Toyota RAV4, is now available with a different color palette inside. You can get a gray interior or a tan interior in some of the other alternatives out there, and their color palettes just seem a little bit more cheerful than what we see generally speaking in most versions of the Escape. But when it comes to fuel economy, hands down the Escape is the winner. Obviously, it is lighter, it's a lot more efficient, it's a newer design overall. We have those hybrid systems available, and the hybrid system in the Ford Escape has a mechanical all-wheel drive system rather than an all-wheel drive axle like we find in the RAV4, while still delivering absolutely excellent fuel economy. In real-world driving, I believe that the Escape, we haven't had the chance, unfortunately, to drive that Escape outside the launch event yet, but I suspect that it's probably going to be beating the Honda CR-V in terms of real-world fuel efficiency because of its overall hybrid design, but it also has the benefit of a mechanical all-wheel drive system like we find in the CR-V hybrid. So if you were shopping in this segment, you want a hybrid and you want the off-road capability, or I should say soft road or adverse weather capability, then the Escape all-wheel drive is going to be the best option for you. But if you want to take your crossover truly off-roading, and I mean places where you might get stuck, you might need those recovery hooks, places where you are definitely going to want a skid plate, then the Jeep Cherokee really stands alone here. Let me know what you think about all that down there in the comments section below. I have to admit that if I were shopping in this segment right now, I might consider the Cherokee, but being the more rational, more pragmatic person that I am, I would probably end up buying the Escape Hybrid or, of course, the Toyota RAV4 Hybrid. Let me know what you think about all that down there as well. Be sure and find us over at facebook.com/AlexNautos, over at Instagram if you want to see the lighter side of things. And, of course, be sure and check out the merch down there. You can buy shirts right like this one that says, "Save the Amber Lamps," because I do prefer amber turn signals. And with all that out of the way, I'll see all of you later.